My name is Marcus Kine, and 4 years back I walked away from a dozen years in the Navy SEALs, having deployed to corners of the globe you won't find mentioned in any declassified file or public record. Yet none of those classified operations, none of the combat or covert work that filled those years, could have remotely prepared me for the Antarctic deployment that unfolded in February 2019. What lay concealed beneath those ancient glacial miles didn't merely append my assumptions about our species' past. It obliterated my belief in God, my sense of humanity's significance in the cosmos, and my grasp on the fundamental fabric of what we call reality. The cruelest revelation was that the ones who dispatched us already possessed full knowledge of what awaited down there. They'd been sitting on that knowledge for decades. Let me recount this from the start, before everything collapsed into nightmare. It was the 8th of February 2019, somewhere past 3 in the morning, when the secure phone on my bedside table began its insistent buzzing. That particular device rang for only one type of reason, and good news never factored into it. I was home in Virginia Beach, asleep beside Emily, my wife, while down the hallway our children, Lily at 8 years old and Ben at 6, leapt through whatever innocent dreams occupy minds that young. I should have let that call go unanswered. I should have destroyed the phone, gathered my family, and vanished to some place the military apparatus could never track us down. But 12 years of ingrained discipline meant I picked up before the third ring. The voice that greeted me was cold, toneless, like someone mechanically reciting words whose meaning escaped them entirely. Chief Petty Officer Kine, this is command. Priority orders have been issued. You're required at Naval Station Norfolk, Building 30, 2, Room 40, 1 by 0800 today. Prepare for extended cold weather deployment, classification level Alpha. I attempted to press for details, but the line died instantly. Throughout my SEAL career, I'd fielded countless cryptic calls, yet something about this particular contact felt fundamentally off. The speaker's voice carried an unusual quality, almost as though he feared the very words he was delivering. Emily stirred beside me, her dark hair catching the faint glow from the bedside clock. Marcus, another deployment, she said, resignation heavy in her tone. A decade of marriage had taught her not to ask questions I was forbidden to answer. Don't have the details yet, I replied truthfully. Could be days, could be longer. I kissed both Lily and Ben while they remained asleep, a ritual I never missed before leaving. Lily murmured, "Love you, Daddy," without surfacing from her dreams. That moment, standing in my daughter's doorway with my deployment bag slung over one shoulder, marked the final time I felt like an ordinary human being. Had I known what waited beneath the Antarctic ice, what we were about to set loose upon the world, I would have abandoned everything that morning, but knowledge of that sort wasn't mine yet. None of us possessed it. The briefing room at Norfolk was unlike anything I'd encountered in my career. Windowless, the air stale from constant recirculation. When I entered at precisely 0800, 5 other SEALs already occupied seats around a gray metal table that looked older than my service record. 2 faces I recognized immediately. David Park from Team 5, a linguistic savant fluent in 9 languages with a doctorate in ancient writing systems. Brilliant mind but peculiar, forever analyzing everything like it was a code waiting to be cracked. Then James River, built like a mountain, someone I'd served alongside in Iraq. The remaining 3 were unfamiliar faces, unusual in the tight community of special operations. At the table's head sat 2 civilians wearing that unmistakable government agency look. Forgettable features, expensive suits, eyes that had witnessed things that destroyed their sleep. The older one, mid-50s with steel, gray hair, introduced himself as Mr. Harrison, no first name, no agency affiliation. The younger one, maybe 40, went by Mr. Cole. Harrison opened a folder bearing more classification stamps than I'd ever seen on a single document. "Gentlemen," he began, his voice carrying the weight of someone who'd sent operators to their deaths before, "what we're discussing here is classified at the absolute highest levels. Each of you was selected based on specific psychological profiles and operational capabilities." "Psychological profiles?" questioned Victor Sullivan, one of the SEALs I didn't know. Stocky build, arms like tree trunks, a scar running from ear to jaw. Harrison's cold eyes fixed on him. Individuals capable of encountering situations that fundamentally challenge their understanding of reality while maintaining operational effectiveness. That should have registered as our first warning sign. When military brass starts discussing challenges to your understanding of reality, you're about to walk into something designed to mess with your head in ways you can't anticipate. Harrison slid a photograph across the table. It depicted Antarctica, endless white ice extending to every horizon, with a small cluster of prefabricated structures and communication towers barely visible against the glare. This is a classified research facility, approximately 50 kilometers from McMurdo Station, Harrison stated. It doesn't appear on any official maps. 4 days ago, all contact with the research team stationed there ceased. Their final transmission indicated they'd made a significant discovery during deep ice drilling operations. He paused, letting the implication settle. Your mission is to infiltrate the facility, locate and extract a high-value asset recovered by the research team, and neutralize any threats to operational security. James leaned forward in his chair. Sir, what kind of asset are we discussing? Scientific equipment, classified technology? The look exchanged between Harrison and Cole told me they'd anticipated this question and prepared their evasion. The specifics remain classified above your clearance level, Harrison said. What you need to understand is this asset represents a matter of national security. It cannot remain in an unsecured location. Translation: we're not telling you anything, just execute your mission. David raised his hand. What about the research team? Are we conducting rescue or recovery operations? The distinction mattered. Rescue assumed living people. Recovery meant collecting bodies. Harrison's expression remained unchanged, unknown. The facility went dark 4 days ago. No distress signals, no emergency beacons, just silence. Your primary objective is the asset. Any personnel encountered are secondary priority. They were telling us the people down there were expendable. Whatever they'd discovered wasn't. Cole produced additional photographs showing specialized Arctic gear. You'll be issued extreme cold weather equipment rated for temperatures down to -50 Celsius. Frostbite can occur on exposed skin within 2 minutes. You'll be operating in one of Earth's most hostile environments. The briefing continued for another 2 hours. Helicopter insertion protocols, radio silence requirements, 72-hour extraction window. But what they withheld was infinitely more significant than what they revealed. They didn't explain why a routine research operation had gone completely silent. They didn't clarify what kind of asset required a SEAL team for retrieval. And they absolutely didn't mention that what we were about to discover would prove human civilization is nothing more than a recurring nightmare, and we were about to trigger the current cycle's end. The flight to Antarctica consumed 19 hours in a C-130 that had seen better decades. No windows, minimal comfort, just 6 SEALs and enough equipment to outfit a small army, all strapped inside a metal tube flying over Earth's most desolate region. For the final 7 hours of flight, all I could see through the small porthole was white, pure, endless mind, numbing white stretching to every horizon, the kind of emptiness that makes you comprehend how truly insignificant you are. James kept cracking jokes about penguin hunting, but even his humor couldn't penetrate the tension we all felt. Something was fundamentally wrong about this mission. We could all sense it in our bones. When the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom 30 minutes before landing, his words confirmed our instincts. Gentlemen, current ground temperature is -43 Celsius with wind gusts reaching 60 miles per hour. Visibility is below 50 meters. We'll have 10 minutes on the ground to offload before we have to get airborne again. The landing was brutal. The kind of controlled crash that makes you grateful to be alive even though you're now stranded in hell. When that cargo door opened, the cold struck us like a physical assault. I'd experienced cold before Alaska, Norway, high-altitude operations, but this was different. This cold wanted you dead, and it would succeed given the slightest opportunity. The wind screamed like something alive and enraged. driving ice crystals that felt like razor blades against any exposed skin. We grabbed our gear and moved away from the aircraft as the C-130 went airborne again within 8 minutes, leaving us standing in a white void that stretched to infinity in every direction. The research facility was supposed to be 3 kilometers northeast, but in visibility, this poor it might as well have been on another planet. We moved in tactical formation, David on point with GPS navigation, James and River on the flanks, Sullivan and Santos bringing up the rear while I coordinated. After 50 minutes of fighting through knee-deep snow, David's voice crackled over the radio. "I've got structures ahead, approximately 200 meters, thank God," I thought. But when we got close enough to see the facility clearly, we knew immediately that something catastrophic had occurred here. The place resembled a war zone, equipment scattered everywhere, scientific instruments half buried in snowdrifts, prefab buildings with doors hanging open and banging in the wind like some apocalyptic wind chime. No lights, no heat signatures on our thermal scopes, no signs of life. The facility's main antenna array was twisted and bent like something had tried to rip it from the ground. "Jesus," James muttered over the radio. What the hell happened here? But it was Sullivan who discovered the first real indication this wasn't just a botched evacuation. "Got blood over here," he called out. We converged on his position near the main lab building. There, frozen in the snow like some macabre art installation, was a trail of blood leading from the building's entrance toward the communication array. Not drops or spatters. This was a steady stream, like someone had been dragged while bleeding heavily. The blood trail ran about 60 meters before just stopping. No body, no more blood, just an abrupt termination in the middle of the snowfield. "Where did they go?" Santos asked. Nobody had an answer. People don't just vanish in Antarctica. As we approached the main lab building, more disturbing details became visible. The door hadn't merely been left open, it had been torn off its hinges from the inside, heavy, duty hinges designed to withstand Antarctic conditions, ripped apart like paper. The walls around the doorframe showed deep gouges, like someone had tried to claw their way out, but the scratches were too deep, too uniform. No human fingernails made those marks. Inside, we found chaos. Overturned tables, smashed equipment, papers scattered everywhere. But what really disturbed me were the personal items. Family photos, coffee mugs, someone's reading glasses. These people had run for their lives and left everything behind. The communication room told the most disturbing story. Every piece of radio equipment had been systematically destroyed, not by accident or weather, but deliberately. Someone had taken a heavy object to every communication device in the facility. But what sent chills down my spine was what we found written on the wall above the destroyed equipment. Someone had used blood to write a single word in large, desperate letters. "Don't," just that. "Don't what?" "Don't come here. Don't look for us. Don't try to understand what we found." As I stood there staring at that word written in frozen blood, I realized we were about to discover exactly what they meant. And I was beginning to understand that whatever had happened here was just the beginning of something far, far worse. We spent the next 3 hours conducting a systematic sweep of every building. Each one told the same story of panic and terror. In the mess hall, meals sat frozen on tables, abandoned mid-bite. Playing cards were scattered across one table, like someone had jumped up in the middle of a game. In the kitchen, a pot of soup still sat on the stove, where it had boiled over and frozen into a grotesque sculpture. Nobody abandons hot food in Antarctica unless something truly terrible is happening. The living quarters were worse, clothes thrown around like people had been packing in a panic, suitcases half filled then abandoned. I found one room where someone had been writing in a journal, the pen still lying on the open page where they'd stopped mid-sentence. The last entry was dated 4 days ago. Drilling team broke through at 14,500 meters today. Dr. Mitchell won't say what they found, but I heard them arguing in the main lab. Something about organic structures and impossible carbon dating. I'm starting to think we should never have drilled this deep. The entry just stopped there. The person probably never wrote another word. In another room, someone had packed a bag but left family photos scattered on the bed. Who leaves family photos behind unless they're running too fast to think about anything except survival? It was in the facility's main office that we found the first real clues about what had happened. The place was destroyed, papers everywhere, filing cabinets overturned, computers smashed. But David, methodical as always, started piecing together documents from the floor. Most were routine research reports, weather data, supply inventories, personnel schedules. But then he found a folder marked Deep Icy Project Classified that had been torn open and its contents scattered. As we gathered the pages, a picture emerged of what these people had been doing out here. They weren't just studying ice cores or monitoring weather. They'd been drilling deeper into the Antarctic ice sheet than anyone had ever drilled before. According to the documents, the research team had been using advanced thermal drilling equipment to bore down through the ice. They'd started 8 months ago with a goal of reaching 10,000 meters, but something had made them keep going. The reports showed drilling depths of 12,000 meters, then 13,000, then 14,500. At each depth they were finding things that shouldn't have been there: unexpected organic compounds at 11,800 meters, anomalous structural formations at 13,200 meters, material composition inconsistent with known geological formations. These weren't things you expect to find buried under miles of ice that's been there for millions of years. But it was a handwritten note clipped to the last drilling report that made my blood run cold. Someone had scrawled in panicked handwriting, "It's not geological. The structures are architectural. Architectural. We found buildings down there, or something like buildings. Dr. Mitchell is calling it pre-Cambrian construction, but that's impossible. Nothing built structures 600 million years ago. Nothing on Earth anyway. The organic compounds show signs of preservation that defy everything we know about decay. Command needs to know we didn't find ruins. We found something that was deliberately buried, something that was meant to stay buried forever." The note was signed Dr. Richard Foster and dated 2 days before the facility went dark. David found the next piece of the puzzle in the server room. Most of the equipment had been destroyed, but tucked behind one rack he found a backup drive that had been overlooked. When we plugged it into his ruggedized laptop, we found audio logs from the drilling operations. First few recordings were routine scientific chatter, but as we listened to logs from the final days, the tone changed dramatically. Voices became strained, arguments broke out, people started using words like unprecedented and impossible constantly. The last audio log was from Dr. Mitchell herself, and her voice was barely above a whisper. Day 243 of drilling operations. We've reached 14,517 meters depth. The thermal readings are all wrong. Temperature down there should be near absolute zero, but our instruments show fluctuations consistent with biological activity. I know how that sounds, but the organic compounds we're bringing up aren't fossils. They're fresh, some of them are still. God help me, some of them are still warm. The recording ended there. The final document we found was an evacuation order, apparently drafted by Dr. Mitchell just hours before the facility went dark. It was never sent. Immediate evacuation required. Deep drilling operations have encountered structures and materials that pose potential biological and psychological hazards to all personnel. Something at depth is responding to our presence. Drilling equipment shows signs of external manipulation from below. Recommend immediate cessation of all operations and emergency evacuation. If you receive this message and we are not here, do not attempt rescue. Seal the drilling site. Classify this location as permanently off limits. What we found down there was meant to stay buried. Some discoveries should never see daylight. At the bottom, someone had added in different handwriting, "Too late." It's already coming up. As we finished reading through the documents, I looked around at my team. The same realization was dawning in all our eyes. We weren't here to recover some hive-value asset from an abandoned research facility. We were standing in a place where an entire team of scientists had discovered something so terrifying that they'd tried to destroy all evidence before fleeing into the Antarctic wasteland. And whatever they'd found 14,500 meters below the ice wasn't just a discovery. It was something that had started responding to their presence, something that was coming up. The mission briefing had been a lie. We weren't an extraction team. We were the cleanup crew sent to deal with whatever these researchers had accidentally unleashed from the depths of the Antarctic ice sheet. And judging by the blood trails and destroyed equipment, whatever it was had gotten to them first. Finding the entrance to the underground facility was like discovering a secret that was never meant to be found. We'd been searching the compound for another hour when Santos noticed something odd about the snow patterns near the destroyed communication array. The drifts were unnatural, like heavy equipment had been moved back and forth over the same area repeatedly. When we cleared away the snow with our tools, we found a massive metal hatch set flush with the ground, maybe 5 feet square with a wheel lock that looked like it belonged on a submarine. The thing was built to withstand serious pressure, and when James tried the wheel, it moved with smooth precision that told you this wasn't temporary construction. This had been here for a long time. The metal was weathered but solid, with markings stamped into it that looked like Cyrillic letters. Soviet construction, probably from the 1980s. When we finally got the hatch open, air rushed up from below that was somehow even colder than the surface temperature. Air so cold it burned to breathe. But mixed with that cold was something else, a smell I couldn't identify, not decay, but something organic and ancient, like opening a tomb sealed for centuries. David dropped a chem light down the opening. We watched it fall for what seemed like forever before it hit bottom, illuminating a metal shaft with a ladder running down one side. "How deep does this go?" Santos whispered. We were about to find out. We rigged our rappelling gear and started the descent. I went first. Rappelling down that shaft was like descending into the Earth's bowels. The walls were smooth metal, decades old judging by the corrosion and ice buildup. Every 20 feet or so were landing platforms with maintenance equipment, all covered in ice that suggested this place had been abandoned long before the recent research team arrived. As we descended, our headlamps picked out disturbing details. Pipes and conduits ran down the walls, but some had been torn open, like something had clawed through the metal. And there were scratches in the walls themselves, deep gouges that definitely weren't made by construction equipment. After what felt like an eternity but was probably only 12 minutes, we reached the bottom. We were standing in a circular chamber carved from ice, maybe 40 feet across, with 3 tunnels leading off in different directions. The construction was impressive. Whoever built this had serious engineering expertise. The ice walls were reinforced with metal supports, and there was evidence of electrical systems installed decades ago, but recently upgraded with modern equipment. David checked his depth gauge. We're about 250 meters below the surface, 250 meters of solid ice above our heads. If something went wrong down here, if the tunnels collapsed, we'd be buried in an ice tomb nobody would ever find. The first tunnel we explored headed north and showed clear signs of recent activity. The floor had been cleared of ice, and there were tracks from wheeled equipment, probably the drilling apparatus we'd read about. As we moved deeper, our headlamps started picking out details that made it clear this wasn't just a simple research facility. The tunnels were too old, too well constructed, too extensive to have been built by the recent team. This was Soviet construction from the 1980s, but what were the Russians doing building massive underground facilities in Antarctica during the Cold War? About 100 meters into the main tunnel, James called a halt. "Boss, you need to see this." What he was illuminating made my blood run cold. Carved into the ice wall at shoulder height were symbols, not Russian letters, not English, not any language I'd ever seen. They looked ancient, almost primitive, but arranged with precision that suggested intelligence and purpose. The symbols were carved deep, some pictographic, others completely abstract, geometric patterns that hurt to look at for too long. "Russian code?" James asked, but I knew it wasn't. There was something about those symbols that triggered a deep, instinctive revulsion, like my brain was recognizing something it was supposed to forget. David was photographing everything when Sullivan made a discovery that changed everything. He'd been exploring a side passage when he called out, "Got more writing over here, but this is different." When we joined him, we found walls covered in symbols, but these weren't carved into ice. These were carved into solid granite underneath the ice. The Russian tunnels had broken through into something that was already there, something that had been buried under the Antarctic ice sheet for God knows how long. The symbols here were more complex, more elaborate, arranged in patterns that seemed to tell stories. Unlike the simple carvings we'd found earlier, these had been filled with some kind of dark material that made them stand out like black veins against pale stone. Standing in that ancient tunnel, looking at symbols that predated any known civilization, I felt something I'd never experienced in all my years of service. Not fear of the enemy or concern about mission failure, but deep existential dread that came from realizing everything I thought I knew about human history might be completely wrong. Those symbols weren't random marks, they were warnings, and we were about to discover exactly what they were warning us about. Following the main tunnel deeper, we came to a massive chamber that opened up like a cathedral carved from ice and rock. I'm talking about a space the size of an airplane hangar, with a vaulted ceiling that disappeared into shadows beyond our lights. But what dominated the entire space was a drilling apparatus that defied everything I thought I knew about engineering. This thing was enormous, a drill tower stretching up into the darkness, supported by a framework of steel girders that could support a skyscraper. The drill itself was easily 12 feet in diameter, with cutting heads that looked designed to bore through a planet. Around the base, Soviet-era control panels and monitoring equipment sat silent and dark, covered in decades of ice and dust. This wasn't some research project. This was an industrial operation built to drill deeper than anyone had ever attempted. Soviet markings were everywhere, equipment labels in Cyrillic, warning signs in Russian, even propaganda posters that had somehow survived decades in this frozen environment. One showed heroic Soviet workers conquering the frozen wasteland for the glory of the motherland. David started translating equipment labels. Deep drilling apparatus, geological survey equipment, core sample analysis is standard scientific stuff, except for the scale. This must have cost millions of rubles and required hundreds of people to construct. How did they build something this massive without the world knowing? We found our answers in the main control room. Banks of Soviet computers and monitoring equipment lined the walls, most still functional. When David powered up one terminal using our portable generator, we discovered the Russians had been meticulous record keepers. Files dating back to 1986 showed the progression of what they called Project Kache, a deep drilling operation authorized at the highest levels of Soviet government. Initial mission parameters were standard: geological survey work, study Antarctic geology, establish permanent Soviet presence. But as we scrolled through months of reports, the mission objectives started changing. References to unusual formations, anomalous readings, extraordinary discoveries became more frequent. The drilling logs were fascinating, if disturbing. They'd started in March 1986, working around the clock to push deeper into the ice sheet. The first few thousand meters were routine ice, rock, more ice, the geological layers you'd expect. But around 8,500 meters depth, they started encountering what their reports described as structural anomalies. Rock formations weren't behaving according to geology textbooks. There were cavities where there should have been solid rock, empty spaces that suggested something had been deliberately excavated millions of years ago. By 10,000 meters, they were finding what they called architectural features: straight lines, right angles, geometric patterns that nature doesn't create. But it was a report dated October 12, 1986, that made my skin crawl. The drilling team had reached 14,000 meters when they broke through into what the report described as a vast subterranean cavity of artificial construction. They'd found something down there, something big enough to house structures the Soviet engineers couldn't explain. The report's author, Dr. Viktor Volkov, wrote in barely controlled scientific language about discovering architectural remnants of unknown origin, organic compounds showing impossible preservation, and atmospheric anomalies suggesting recent biological activity. Reading between the lines, you could sense his growing excitement and terror as the operation revealed evidence of something that wasn't supposed to exist. The final entries in the Soviet records were dated November 1986, painting a picture of a project spinning out of control. Dr. Volkov's reports became increasingly frantic as his team brought up core samples from the deepest levels. He wrote about finding preserved biological specimens of impossible age, technological artifacts predating known civilization, and evidence of intelligence that challenges our understanding of evolutionary history. But more disturbing were the effects on the drilling team. Personnel reports mentioned increasing incidents of psychological distress, behavioral anomalies, and severe sleep disturbances among workers who had direct contact with the deepest core samples. Several team members had to be evacuated for nervous conditions. Dr. Volkov's final report, dated November 28, 1986, was just 2 sentences: drilling operations terminated by emergency order. Facility sealed pending further evaluation. Santos found the real answer in a locked filing cabinet. Inside was a folder marked classification absolute in both Russian and English, containing what appeared to be final communications between the Antarctic facility and Moscow. The last telegram, sent November 29, 1986, was barely coherent. Breakthrough at 14,276 meters, contact with subterranean structures, specimens brought to surface showing signs of activation. Immediate evacuation required. Repeat immediate evacuation. Project Cache terminated. Do not attempt recovery. Seal facility and classify location as permanently forbidden. What we found was meant to stay buried. The response from Moscow was chilling. Evacuation approved. All personnel maintain absolute silence. Facility to be abandoned in place. Official records to show Project Cache never existed. Standing in that Soviet control room, reading decades-old reports, the full scope became clear. We weren't the first to discover something buried here. The Russians had found it 33 years ago, and whatever they'd discovered had been so disturbing that one of the most powerful governments on Earth had decided to pack up and run rather than continue investigating. They'd sealed this facility and tried to forget it ever existed. But the American research team had found it again, started drilling again, and apparently woken up whatever the Soviets had been smart enough to leave alone. We weren't just dealing with some archaeological curiosity. We were dealing with something that had the power to make entire nations abandon multi-million-dollar projects and classify the very existence of this place as a state secret. And now we were standing right on top of it. 14,000 meters of excavated shaft leading straight down to whatever was waiting in the darkness below. In a sealed storage room adjacent to the control center, Sullivan found something that changed everything. Hidden behind stacks of Soviet manuals was a metal briefcase, the kind used for classified documents. James made short work of the lock. Inside, we found photographs, geological surveys, and core sample analyses that documented exactly what the Soviets had discovered 14,000 meters beneath the ice. The photographs hit us first, black and white images showing cross-sections of ice and rock at various depths. The first few were routine geological layers, but as the depth markers increased, the images became disturbing. Around 12,000 meters, photographs started showing formations that didn't look natural. Curved walls, geometric patterns, structures that looked like architecture embedded in solid rock. Soviet geologists had marked these images with notes David translated: artificial construction confirmed, organic compounds detected, age dating inconsistent with geological models. Someone had built structures down there, buried under miles of ice for longer than human civilization had existed. But the core sample photographs really made my blood run cold. The Soviets had brought up pieces of whatever was buried down there. Images showed fragments of material that wasn't stone, wasn't metal, wasn't anything I'd seen before. The material looked organic, almost like fossilized wood or bone, but with texture that suggested it had been shaped, carved, deliberately formed into specific patterns. Some fragments showed hieroglyphs or inscriptions, symbols that were clearly artificial but unlike any writing system known to human history. Other pieces showed structural elements, joints, connections, architectural features that proved these weren't random organic deposits. Someone had built something down there, something massive, something deliberately buried under the Antarctic ice sheet millions of years ago. The geological analysis reports were even more disturbing. According to Soviet scientists, the organic material they'd recovered showed preservation that defied everything known about decay and fossilization. Normally, organic material buried for millions of years becomes completely mineralized, but fragments from 14,000 meters showed cellular structures still intact, still recognizable, as if frozen in time rather than naturally preserved. Even more impossible, some core samples showed what reports described as recent biological activity, chemical signatures suggesting the organic material was still alive in some sense, still metabolically active despite being buried under miles of ice for geological ages. David found a folder labeled Structural Analysis containing the most detailed documentation. Technical drawings showed a massive structure, easily the size of several city blocks, embedded in solid rock 14,000 meters below the surface. The thing wasn't a building in any sense we'd understand. It was more like a complex organic framework with curved walls and chambers that flowed into each other like the interior of some gigantic organism. But the precision was undeniable. This wasn't some natural formation. The angles were too precise, the proportions too deliberate, the overall design too purposeful. Someone had designed this, engineered it, built it with sophistication that challenged everything we thought we knew about prehistoric civilizations. The most disturbing document was a handwritten report by Dr. Volkov himself, personal observations that never made it into official Soviet records. Written in a mixture of Russian and English, the report described his realization that the structure wasn't just ancient. It was impossibly ancient, predating any known civilization by hundreds of millions of years. What we have found challenges every assumption about the development of intelligence on Earth. The construction techniques, the materials, the sheer scale. None of it should be possible for any civilization that existed when this was built. But Volkov's final observations really made me question everything. According to his notes, the deeper core samples weren't just showing preservation, they were showing signs of growth. Chemical analysis indicated the organic material was still actively expanding, still building itself even after millions of years of burial. The structure is not dead, it is dormant. Our drilling operations have provided it with access to the surface, to warmth, to the possibility of emergence. We have not discovered ruins. We have discovered something that was deliberately buried, something that was meant to remain buried, something that is now beginning to wake up. God help us all. We have awakened something that should have stayed asleep forever. The final line was underlined 3 times. It knows we are here. Standing in that storage room, looking at photographs and documents proving the existence of something that wasn't supposed to exist. I felt my rational skepticism crumble. We weren't dealing with archaeological curiosity. We were dealing with evidence of a prehistoric civilization that had possessed technology far beyond anything in human history. And according to Soviet analysis, that civilization hadn't died out. It had been deliberately buried, possibly in hibernation or preservation. Now, 3 years after the Soviets first disturbed its rest, and just days after the American team began drilling again, something that had been sleeping for millions of years was beginning to wake up. And we were standing directly above it, with no idea what we were about to face when it finally opened its eyes. Following the Soviet tunnel system deeper, we reached the main event. The tunnel opened into a cavern so vast our headlamps couldn't reach the walls. What occupied the center stopped us dead. The structure rose like a cathedral designed by something that had never seen human architecture, formed from fossilized organic matter shaped into impossible curves and angles that hurt to follow. The geometry was wrong, massive rib. Like supports curved up the sides like the skeleton of an impossibly large creature. Between the ribs, walls of fossilized flesh stretched in membrane, like sheets. Every inch was covered in intricate symbols that seemed to writhe when you weren't looking directly at them. Is it just me, or does this thing feel like it's watching us? Sullivan said. He was right. Despite having no visible eyes, there was an unmistakable sense of being observed by something vast, alien, and utterly inhuman. The entrance was a massive oval opening bordered by fossilized ribs. As we approached, it became clear the opening led into a space that seemed much deeper than the external dimensions should allow, like a building bigger on the inside than the outside. Standing at that threshold, I made a decision I've regretted every day since. I should have ordered immediate retreat, but I was trained to complete missions regardless of risk. "All right, people," I said, "let's see what's inside." Those words condemned my team to witness horrors no human should ever see. The interior defied physics, cathedral-like, with dimensions that made no sense. But it wasn't the impossible architecture that stopped us. It was the congregation. Arranged in neat rows were hundreds, maybe thousands of figures. At first they looked like statues, positioned in attitudes of worship. But as we moved closer, the horrible truth became apparent. These were bodies, preserved, mummified, frozen in time. Their skin had a translucent, crystalline quality. They showed no signs of decay, but the real horror was their anatomy. The bone structure was wrong. Skulls larger and more elongated, limbs longer in proportion, hands with too many fingers or joints that bent in wrong directions. These were human, but not human as we understand it. "How old do you think these things are?" Sullivan whispered. According to Soviet records, this structure had been buried for millions of years. We were looking at evidence of human civilization that predated accepted human evolution by geological ages. They were all oriented toward an altar at the center, an organic pedestal covered in pulsing inscriptions. The bodies were arranged in concentric circles, in poses of extreme devotion. Santos made the discovery that shattered any remaining hope. In the innermost circle, he found bodies that were clearly more recent, Soviet winter gear from the 1980s. Members of the original drilling team had joined the ancient congregation. While we tried to process this, David was documenting everything. He had a doctorate in ancient linguistics from Stanford. If anyone could make sense of the alien inscriptions, it was him. "This script appears logographic," he muttered, photographing symbols. Each symbol represents complete concepts, but the complexity suggests sophistication that shouldn't have existed when this was built. The inscriptions seemed to shift when you weren't looking directly at them. Some were pictographic, stylized representations you could almost recognize. Others were purely abstract, geometric patterns that hurt to process. After an hour of analysis, David started making connections. "I'm seeing patterns similar to Proto-Sumerian cuneiform and Mayan symbols, but this predates both by millions of years. It's like looking at the template from which all human languages evolved." When he attempted translations, things got disturbing. He identified a recurring symbol cluster he translated as the first ones or those who came before. It appeared with concepts like before the waters and when the world was young. "This appears to be a historical record," he said, voice barely a whisper. "The symbols suggest a timeline that stretches back. This can't be right. According to this, the beings who built this were already ancient when the first life crawled from the oceans." The more he translated, the worse it became. The beings claimed to be Earth's original inhabitants. They spoke of shaping the lesser creatures and preparing the world for those who would come after. It sounded like directed evolution on a planetary scale. But the final inscription, carved into the altar itself, revealed the true horror. "They're not describing themselves as the first intelligent species," David said, voice cracking. "They're describing themselves as servants of something else, something they call the true creator or the one who dreams reality. According to the inscription, they built this as a temple to a cosmic entity existing outside normal space and time. They claimed everything we understand as reality, matter, energy, physical laws are just the dreams of this entity. The final lines made David's voice drop to a whisper. When the true creator awakens, when the dream that is reality ends, all existence will return to the void. But we, the faithful servants, prepared through ritual and sacrifice, we shall remain to serve in the new reality born from the old. We are the eternal congregation, forever frozen in worship, forever ready to welcome our Master's return. At the bottom was a date marker. According to David's translation, it predicted the awakening would occur millions of years in the future, when the lesser creatures, modern humans, would develop technology to break through the barriers keeping the true creator imprisoned. Our ability to drill deep and discover this temple was part of their plan. We weren't intruders, we were prophesied servants who'd finally developed the capability to complete the work they'd started millions of years ago. We were here to wake something that would end everything we understood as reality. And judging by the way the inscriptions pulsed brighter and the temperature in the chamber rose despite being under miles of ice, the awakening had already begun. That's when everything went to hell. The first sign was Sullivan noticing our breath wasn't visible anymore. The temperature was rising rapidly, like someone had activated massive heating systems, but there was no heating system. The warmth came from the structure itself, radiating from fossilized organic walls like heat from a living body. The inscriptions grew brighter, pulsing with inner light in rhythmic patterns like a heartbeat. "The symbols are changing," David said, panic in his voice, new patterns appearing that weren't there before. But it was James who noticed the worst change. "Boss, we got movement." The preserved bodies, figures frozen for millions of years, were moving. Not walking, but subtle shifts, the turn of a head, the adjustment of an arm, like watching statues come to life in slow motion. The movement was synchronized, coordinated, as if controlled by a single intelligence, using their bodies as extensions of its will. Santos was monitoring our equipment, all electronics going crazy. The entire structure is warming from the inside. Heat patterns are organic, like something alive. I could feel it too, not just temperature, but presence, intelligence, something vast and alien slowly becoming aware of us. The figures closest to the altar showed full animation. Ancient humans with elongated skulls began moving with purpose, turning toward us with expressions mixing recognition and hunger, not physical hunger, but something deeper. Some began to speak in sounds that weren't language but conveyed meaning directly to the brain. "They're welcoming us," David said, voice cracking, saying we're the ones they've been waiting for, the ones prophesied to complete the awakening. The Soviet figures, members of Dr. Volkov's team, were most disturbing. They retained enough human appearance to be recognizable, but their movements were wrong, and their eyes held too much knowledge and too little humanity. One approached us, movement smooth but alien. When he spoke, his voice was his own, but the words came from something else. "You have come at the appointed time, the dreamer stirs, the faithful must prepare for the new reality." More figures animated around us. Temperature rose, inscriptions pulsed brighter. I realized we weren't just witnesses. We were participants. The structure was using our life energy to fuel its awakening. I could feel it, a subtle pressure in my mind, thoughts that weren't my own, a growing awareness of something vast and patient, slowly opening its eyes after millions of years. "We're leaving," I shouted. Now, but it was too late for some. Sullivan stood motionless, staring at nothing. When I grabbed him, he looked at me with transcendent peace. "Can't you see how beautiful it's going to be?" We'd lost him. Santos was worse, on his knees, mimicking the worship postures with movements too fluid to be human. When James tried pulling him up, Santos fought back with impossible strength, face twisted in rage and ecstasy. "The harvest is beginning," he snarled in a voice with harmonics that hurt to hear. James had to use his knife to break free. David was fighting the influence better but struggling. The structure is preparing to physically manifest the entity. The organic material is changing, becoming something else. I made the hardest decision of my career. Sullivan and Santos weren't coming voluntarily. James was already fighting toward the exit. David followed, but Sullivan and Santos had made their choice. I did what training taught me, save who I could, leave the rest behind. Fighting through the tunnels while the structure awakened was like escaping from a living digestive tract. Walls contracted and expanded, passages twisted. Behind us, Sullivan and Santos's voices joined the collective chorus. Part of me envied them. The tunnel system fought our escape. Passages blocked by organic growths, temperature rising, air thick and humid. David showed heat exhaustion. James helped support him through corridors becoming more like arteries. "We're inside something alive," David gasped. "Something trying to digest us." The main shaft was worse. The latter, partially dissolved by organic acid, remaining rungs slippery, the shaft filled with warm mist, psychic pressure increasing with every meter climbed. The entity was fully awake, trying to prevent our escape, filling our minds with visions. Halfway up, David started laughing, the broken laughter of cracking sanity. "It's showing me the future, all the cycles to come. We're not escaping, just postponing the inevitable." I slapped him to shock him back to awareness. When we reached the surface facility, I thought we'd made it. Temperature back to Antarctic levels, breath visible again, psychic pressure diminished. But the entire surface facility showed signs of organic transformation. Walls that had been concrete were now partially organic, covered in pulsing inscriptions. The entity's influence was spreading. We made it out just as the Soviet complex collapsed, consumed by the alien organism reshaping everything. The last thing I saw was the communication array twisting into a massive organic antenna reaching toward the sky. We'd escaped immediate danger, but we'd released something that would never be contained. The awakening was complete. The harvest cycle had begun. Extraction took 60 hours. David and I barely spoke. What do you say when the truth sounds insane? The rescue team asked about Sullivan, Santos, James, and the missing researchers. We stuck to our cover story: equipment malfunction, structural collapse, no survivors. But at McMurdo Station, it became clear someone already knew what we'd found. The debriefers were the same agency types from the original briefing. They separated David and me immediately. I didn't see him for 8 months. My debriefing lasted 5 days in a windowless room. They asked questions far too specific for people who didn't already know the answers. Chief Kine, Mr. Harrison said, "What you discovered represents clear danger to national security. The knowledge you've gained cannot be shared with anyone under any circumstances." He slid over a non-disclosure agreement so comprehensive that discussing the mission was essentially a capital offense. But the paperwork was too polished. These people had experience managing the aftermath of contact with entities that shouldn't exist. Then came the threats. Photographs of my family, surveillance reports of Emily's routines, school records for Lily and Ben. "Your wife teaches 2nd grade," Harrison said casually. "Your daughter takes piano lessons Wednesdays. Your son plays youth soccer." Message received. Their safety depended on my silence. They released me with an honorable discharge and a generous pension. Official record showed medical retirement for psychological trauma. I returned to Virginia Beach with secrets eating me alive. The drinking started immediately. Beer, then whiskey, then whatever was strong enough to block dreams of organic corridors and voices speaking directly to the brain. Emily tried to understand. But how do you explain you've seen evidence that everything she believes is a lie? The nightmares were worst. Every night back in that temple, watching Sullivan and Santos join the congregation, seeing visions of previous civilization cycles, feeling the alien influence, and realizing part of me found their offer appealing. My relationship with Lily and Ben became impossible. Every time I looked at them, I saw the future waiting, the same choice between absorption and annihilation every human society had faced. Emily filed for divorce 9 months later. I didn't contest it. I'd become a stranger. She took the kids to Oregon. Her last words, "Whatever happened over there, I hope you find peace because this isn't living." For 4 years, I've lived alone in squalid apartments, surviving on disability between drinking binges. Tried therapy, medication, everything the VA offered, but how do you treat someone whose trauma comes from discovering reality itself is a lie? The surveillance never stopped. Every apartment, every job monitored by people ensuring I never broke silence. 2 weeks ago, I received a message from David Park, but David died 18 months ago. Single car accident, official report said. Termination designed to look accidental. The message was simple, it's fully awake now. Deep sensing showing massive activity at all sites. They're sending teams down, but not for research, for preparation. Final phase begun. Tell them Marcus before it's too late. Attached were satellite photos of Antarctica. Thermal imaging showing heat where there should be only ice. Seismic readings indicating massive underground construction at our nightmare location. But worst were personnel files and mission briefings. The government hasn't been covering up what we found. They've been expanding the operation. Over 2 years, dozens of specialized teams sent to Antarctica, not to study or contain, but to accelerate the awakening. Engineers, linguists, psychologists, religious specialists, all tasked with establishing communication with the entity we released. Project name, Operation Deep Communion. It represents voluntary surrender of human civilization to cosmic parasites, manipulating our development for millions of years. Thermal data is most terrifying. Heat signature from the Antarctic site now covers an area the size of Manhattan. Ice sheet above completely melted. Electromagnetic readings suggest massive technological activity exceeding human capability. Whatever we found isn't just awake, it's coordinating with other installations. Ground, penetrating radar has identified similar organic structures under ice sheets, ocean floors, deserts worldwide, all showing accelerating activity. Our drilling didn't wake one entity. It sent a wake-up call to a global network that's been waiting millions of years to begin the final harvest. So I'm telling you this now, despite knowing that breaking silence will result in my disappearance before this can spread widely. I've spent 2 weeks copying David's transmission and distributing through channels I hope surveillance can't control. If the timeline's accurate, we have maybe 18 months before the entity network reaches activation levels to begin the final phase. I know how this sounds, paranoid delusions of someone drinking too much, but I know what I saw, what knowledge was forced into my mind by intelligence, so vast human consciousness can barely process its existence. And the physical evidence, satellite readings, electromagnetic signatures, seismic activity worldwide, supports everything I'm saying. So if you're reading this, if somehow this reached you before they suppressed it, understand this is happening now. Sites are active, entity network is coordinating. Human governments are cooperating with a process that will transform our species into something serving purposes we can't comprehend. The harvest cycle is accelerating toward conclusion. We may be the last generation with opportunity to resist before resistance becomes impossible. I don't know what resistance would look like or if it's even possible, but silence isn't an option. Pretending this isn't happening won't make it go away. The only hope for preserving anything recognizably human is acknowledging what we're facing and finding some way to fight back against entities viewing our civilization as nothing more than renewable resources. So I'm breaking my silence, telling you everything, hoping somewhere are people with courage and capability to do something before it's too late. Because if the timeline's accurate, this may be the last warning from someone who's seen what's coming and still remembers what it means to be human. After that, all voices will speak in harmony, all consciousness flowing in one direction, the harvest complete, the cycle ended. Reality will be digested and reformed according to the will of something beyond human understanding. And whatever emerges won't be human in any sense we'd recognize. So remember this story, share it if you can, investigate if you have resources, resist if you have courage. Because the alternative is becoming part of an eternal congregation, serving entities that view your consciousness as food, your memories as entertainment, your entire species as particularly interesting livestock. And if you think I'm crazy, if this seems like paranoid fantasy of a broken soldier, then I hope to God you're right, because the alternative is worse than anything human imagination has ever conceived. If you found this account disturbing, don't let it end here. Share this testimony, investigate the thermal anomalies appearing in restricted zones worldwide, and decide for yourself whether one broken soldier's warning deserves your attention. Because 18 months isn't much time, and silence has never saved anyone from what's already awake and waiting beneath the ice.